Classmate. Dominating.
Hello everyone, XV here with another Dota 2 educational video. Today we'll be speaking about Gankers. While not considered a traditional role by Dota 2 standards, Gankers all meet certain criteria and are thus easy to define. They're semi-durable, they deal a lot of damage in a short period of time, and they have a way of initiating a skirmish, but not a team fight. Notorious for peaking early and then falling behind, in this video we'll be talking about ways to take your game further and carve out an early lead that you can then ride through until endgame. In terms of where they shine, the latter part of early game and the beginning of mid game is where they perform best. Unlike supports or nukers, they do require some items to function, normally 1 or 2 key items plus boots of some kind. While their mana pools are traditionally inferior for prolonged engagements and harassing with spells in lane, their abilities generally deal a lot of damage for their global animation and always come with an additional effect that makes finishing the kill much easier. Their weakness stems from their inability to scale like true carry heroes, and if the game runs on too long, they'll find themselves outclassed. As a ganker, it's important to have an experience advantage over your enemies. This means that you want to solo your lane and gank double or tri lanes. For this purpose, the most common lane to pick is middle, for 3 reasons. Unlike the other lanes, you're a lot less vulnerable as a solo hero in middle, provided you play intelligently. In Dota 2, your risk of death is directly proportional to the number of paths that you can be attacked from. Standing near the tower, all 3 routes to you are in your front arc, and it's quite difficult to be flanked without your opponent taking a noticeably long path or being spotted by wards. Your tier 2 tower is also very near, making it a daunting idea for your opponent to dive on you. Remember that this is a two-way street. I see a lot of deaths come from overzealous middle lane players from both teams. Some people swear by going bottle first. Personally, I think this is an inferior build. The 2 principles behind your starting equipment are simple: regen and stats. While a bottle does fill the role of regen, its cost to return just isn't there. A tango will cover you until you farm the bottle for a fraction of the cost and still leave you able to afford combinations of other items for stats that will evolve into your mid-game equipment. Going bottle first, your lowered stats will prevent you from trading hits effectively, leave your HP total much lower than it could be, and just to stay safe, you'll be drinking from it too frequently to really maximize its potential. Plus, you won't be benefiting from the mana regeneration until at least level 3, when abilities become worth using. That said, the bottle is the ultimate early to mid-game regen tool, providing 135 health and 70 mana back over 3 seconds. Best of all, it has 3 charges, and if that wasn't enough, it's refillable. But it's not the fountain you should be using to refill your bottle with. Rune control is paramount for early game victory, and as the middle lane hero, your responsibility. Runes will spawn at 0-0 and respawn every 2 minutes at one of the 2 locations on the river, provided there isn't a rune already on the map. While not incredibly important, it is worth mentioning that the same rune type will not spawn twice in a row. Ideally, you will want a ward at both rune locations, but only one is necessary for you to decipher which spot the rune has spawned to avoid wasting time wandering. If your opponent is skilled, they'll also be watching the runes. You'll need to move out early and unfortunately take a guess as to which spawn point to be at on the minute mark and hope that you're right. Clicking on a rune with a bottle in your inventory will fill your bottle with the rune. The next time you take a drink, you'll instead activate the rune and your bottle will be left with 3 charges regardless of its state when you bottled the rune. This allows you to use runes to refill your bottle for regeneration purposes and save runes for when they're going to be most effective: ganks. As a side note, if you're not going to make it to the rune before your opponent will and have the opportunity, you can shoot it with your basic attack to kill it. While it's better to deny your opponent the rune by taking it yourself, this is a satisfactory alternative. Taking a trip to the runes can be rationalized as worthwhile because refilling your bottle enables you to return to mid at full HP and mana and continue harassing with spells and taking last hits. To take your game further though, you can use runes as a means to set up ganks. The first thing I see players do wrong when attempting these early game ganks is not announcing that they're coming. Speak it over voice chat, type it out, or at the very least, ping and hope that your teammates figure out what you're getting at. While map awareness is critical and the responsibility of every player, your teammates aren't psychic. It troubles me when the AI in this game plays better than the average player. Good job, Bot4. Done properly, you or a teammate in lane will get a kill every 2 to 3 minutes using this method. Even if you make a mistake and fail to make the kill, the enemy heroes will need to heal. Without the luxury of the bottle that you have, this will either cost them gold in the form of healing items or gold and experience should they retreat to their fountain. Done improperly, and you or your teammate will die and feed the enemy team. So don't mess it up. It's important to remember that as a ganker, near the beginning of this phase you will be at your best, but by the end, if your opposing team's carry is farmed effectively, you will fall short. By the 25-minute mark, you should have over 15 sum total of kills and assists with a 4-to-1 or better ratio of kills to deaths. Provided you've been using Rune Swaying effectively, these numbers are very realistic. At this point, you need to appraise the game and decide the next course of action. If your team has the lead, going for an early end is best. Alternatively, if both teams are roughly equal, it's safer to focus your efforts on shutting down their carry and making sure that your team farms effectively. These two plans aren't entirely mutually exclusive, but let's talk a little bit more about both. To accomplish this, you follow a simple mantra: gank, tower, swing. Generally speaking, you're going to want to increase the number of wards you have on the map. Places like here, if you're Radiant, and here, if you're Dire, are excellent because they provide you with ample knowledge of heroes who are vulnerable. Using Smoke of Deceit, you will mask your team and seek out isolated enemies. Let me be really clear on this. There is nothing fair about these fights. Initiate and rip them apart. With team numbers imbalanced, you immediately push and take a tower. Your opponents will be left in a very difficult position. Either you force them to engage when they're outnumbered, or you force them to let a tower fall uncontested. With the tower down, swing to another lane and repeat. Generally you want all the tier 1 towers down before you start taking tier 2s, but if they have 2 or more players still reviving, you can safely take a tier 2 after a tier 1 in the same lane during the same push. Once everyone on the enemy team is back up, retreat back to your side of the river, smoke again, and repeat. The goal is to apply constant pressure. The enemy should never be left feeling they have breathing room. The important balance to strike, though, is aggression with caution. It's quite easy to overextend and suffer losses in poorly executed team fights and have the opponent simply counter-push and deal the same damage to you. The most common place I see this mistake made is during the tier 2 to 3 transition. Often, after taking a tier 2, teams will overextend into the enemy base. The safer and better play is to swing for another tier 2. If all tier 2 towers are down, you are not obligated to take tier 3 and instead should retreat, regroup, smoke, and repeat the process. That isn't to say that early tier 3s are not possible. If the team fight for the preceding tower goes so well that they have no one alive, for instance, it's safe to push. But 30-minute tier 3s are normally disasters, fueled by overconfidence from success at prior towers. This strategy is for if the game is relatively close, or if your early end has been shut down by some quality defenses. This tactic singles out their carry and assassinates them repeatedly. Essentially, you leave your carry to farm, and then with only 4 people, you as the ganker initiate kills on theirs. After killing their carry, you can pressure nearby towers, but you don't want to engage in a team fight. Your best case, it's a 4 vs 4, and fair fights are for suckers. The idea is just to have your carry out-farm theirs, but it's actually a lot more difficult than it sounds, mostly because it requires a selfless kind of behavior on part of your team who are probably selfishly looking to farm out their shiny epics as well. Try to keep the other 3 members of your team occupied ganking with you, and it'll work out. This kind of 1-2 punch normally gets a lot of flame at the end by your opponents, criticizing the play of their carry, etc. But rest assured it was the cold and calculated decision on your part that won the game. Good work. Generally speaking, we as people like to distribute ourselves evenly. This means that the average player will want to gank all of the enemy heroes. And this is the worst way to do it. There are 4 governing factors when deciding who to kill: rune location, positioning, how many times they've already been ganked, and are they the enemy team's carry. For example, just because the rune is spawned for the 3rd time in a row on the bottom doesn't mean you shouldn't gank bottom. If the person you want to kill is hugging the tower, but someone less desirable is in an easier position to kill, then they take precedence. In Dota, you really want to kick someone when they're down. Not to promote bad sportsmanship, but the reality is that someone who's been ganked already is behind in experience and gold, meaning they'll be easier to kill a second time. Repeated killing on the same player is an easy way to really increase the power gap between teams. It becomes harder and harder to come back from a deficit of this nature, so there's nothing wrong with really grinding it in. Lastly, the enemy team's carry really does take priority. If you have their carry at 0 and 5 by the 12-minute mark, the game is pretty much shot for the opposing team, and the early end mid-game will be very easy to put into play. While this doesn't take much explanation, it's good practice to take the last hits from your support heroes. They'll understand. While this is just the beginning of advanced ganker play, I hope that you found it useful for taking your game further. As always, if you liked the video, please thumbs up, comment, share, and subscribe to stay up to date with future episodes.